The most common mistake people make when it comes to implementing AI is they have an all or nothing approach. And what that means is they either hand over all of their tasks to AI or they hand over none of it because they may have tried AI in the past and it gave them a couple of bad outputs and then they came to the erroneous conclusion that AI doesn't work. But the most powerful AI systems are the ones that have human oversight built into them, and these are what are known as human in the loop systems. To demonstrate this human in the loop concept to you in action, basically what it means is there's going to be an event that happens, right? This may be any button click, this may be a database query, this may be a form submission. There are multiple ways we can look at the system. So basically, whenever say someone creates a post in our post table, Supabase allows us to fire a webhook that would then be sent over into our automation platform, Make or n8n. In this video, we're going to look at how do we do that in n8n. But basically, once someone has created a new post in our post table, by default, we will assign it a status of draft and basically then add this human in the loop component to send it to a manager for review. And based on them approving or rejecting it, we would notify the creator of the post with what the outcome of the manager's decision was. And so this decision making framework is baked into automations, and that's what we call human in the loop systems. Okay, so we are going to do this in three parts. First, we're going to set up the database trigger that would basically occur whenever a new post is inserted into our post table. We're going to assign it a default status of draft. Once the trigger fires, we're basically going to call a database function. That function is going to be responsible to call our webhook, and that webhook is going to be set up in n8n. That's going to send an email to a manager for approval, where they will then have the option to approve or reject it. Okay, so first we're going to set up the database trigger. If we come into Supabase and just go into database and then triggers, you can see that I have it set up, but just to show you how this would work, you would give it a name like post insert HTTP webhook as the name of the trigger. Which table do we want it to run on? So the post table. What event do we want it to run on? So an insert operation. The trigger type can be before or after. In this case, we want it to be after the event. And the orientation, you can just leave that as row. And the function to trigger is going to be the post HTTP webhook function that we have defined. So just to show you how we would set up the function, if we come into the database tab and then go to functions, you can see I have this set up already. So we're going to set up the function now. So if you click on create a new function, you basically just need to give it a function name. In this case, we have called it posts HTTP webhook. So we're going to give it that name. The schema is public, the return type, we don't need to include one. And basically what we are going to do now is just copy this entire function. So if I copy that and paste it in here, basically what this function does, right? It performs an HTTP post request. We specify the URL. So this is the URL that I have set up in n8n. So if we come over into n8n, you can see that we have a webhook node. This is the URL. So I've just copied this URL. I've pasted it into our URL here. The body that we want to send our webhook trigger is basically this select query from, which is nothing but a query to join the two tables. So we take from public profiles P and join it with our post data. And you can see where we have this where condition where p.id is equal to new.user id. The new concept is used when we are talking about using it with triggers and database functions. If you aren't familiar with this syntax, please don't worry. You can always ask Claude or ChatGPT to give you the exact queries based on what you want it to do. And basically, this is sending all of the profile data in addition with the post data. So once we have this data set up in our HTTP request body, this is going to be sent off to n8n, wherein now just to walk you through what we have set up in n8n, we have a webhook trigger. Okay, this we've set up multiple times, but you just need to make sure the HTTP method is post. You could add some authentication if you like. And once you have your request URL, you just set that up in Superbase. Okay, the next node that we use in here is a Gmail node. It's a special Gmail node called send a message and wait for response. So once you use that node, basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to send a message, right? And we're going to see all of this in action. So basically, I send an email with the subject, so new post approval required. And it basically just assumes that you would send an email like this to a manager. You can choose the response type as approval, and you can have it be a single button. And just to show you a few variations of how you can do this, you can have an approve only button or an approve and disapprove. So we're just going to start with an approve only just to show you what this looks like. And basically an email will be sent out, and then we look at the rest of this workflow. So if I come back to our database, we have our database function set up, right? Which we pasted across, which basically joins our profile data and our post data so that we have the entire post with the user information to send to our n8n webhook. And we do that because we will need the creator of the post's email to basically notify them if their post was approved or rejected. So once we have our function set up and we have our trigger set up, which we were discussing earlier, if you were creating a new trigger, you just give it a name. On the public post table, we would choose insert. We would select the trigger type as after the event. We would choose the function to trigger, and basically we would choose the post's HTTP webhook that we have set up, and then click create trigger. And once that is done, we have everything in place for this trigger to fire when a new post is inserted into our post table. That will call our database function, and our database function will trigger a webhook that will then pass all of this data and information into n8n so that we can process it however we like. Just one small thing I forgot to mention is in your database tab, you may need to come over into this database webhooks and just click enable if you are doing this for the first time. But that's about it, and there's no other setting that you need. So coming back to now demoing what we have just set up. So if I come into the table editor and I'm looking at our post table, if I try inserting a new row, so we're going to leave the ID as blank. We're going to change the user ID to be my user ID. We're going to give it a caption of testing our new webhook n8n trigger and function. Okay, we can leave the image URL, video URL blank. We can give it the likes as 100, also optional. The status field, which is a new field we've introduced. So it's just a simple text field that has the default value of draft. And we've introduced a status updated at timestamp. Again, just another column, which has the default timestamp of now. So if we hit save, you can see that our row was created. You can see it here at the bottom. And once this has been inserted, right, our database trigger is going to fire. That's going to call our database function. And that database function is going to trigger our webhook. So if I come into executions, you can see that it is in this waiting state because our webhook has received the data. So if I come in here and just check the JSON that we have received, so you can see we're receiving all of the join data from our profiles and post table. So we have the email of the user ID I used, the likes as 100, the default status of draft, which was got after we inserted the record into our post table, the caption that I just entered, my user ID, the image URL we left blank, the last name comes from our profiles table, the video URL was also blank, created at defaulted to now. deleted ad is null, first name from profiles table, phone number was null, and status updated at, which also had a default value of now, is basically all of the data we have received. Okay, so the next step, which is the send message and wait for response, is now it has sent me an email message and it is currently waiting for my response. So if I come into this node, right, you can see that we had this subject set up, we have a message that is sent, and here the response type that I've used is a custom form, and it uses these fields below. So it basically asks for post feedback as a text input element. The placeholder I haven't entered, and there's no default values, and there's a response form button label to click submit. And now I will show you what that email looks like when it lands in my inbox. Okay, just one small change I made is that I changed this field name to text, and we have it as a text input and the placeholder set up as feedback on the post. We have our webhook data that comes through. I've just pinned it so you can see that it's all of the same data with the caption, all of the user information. And now if we just run this workflow, it's going to send this message and start waiting for our response. And if I come into my email and look at the new email we have received, you can see I've got this, it was 0 minutes ago. It has this interface. You can obviously modify it just using the n8n parameters and change the messaging and formatting to make it look better. But the key thing that I want to show you is when we click on respond, it brings up this form, right, which we configured entirely in this send message and wait for response node, right? We said that it needs to have a text input, a placeholder, the element type is text input. You can add as many form inputs as you like. And then we have a response form button label, which we wanted to be submit. So here, if I say this post is approved and just hit submit, you can see that n8n has recorded our form submission. If we come back into n8n and just look at our workflow, we then have an if node after this Gmail node, which basically checks the json.data.text field to see if it contains the word approved. Now, this may not be always the most robust logic, so it is completely up to you, like what is the check condition you're looking for. Another example you may look for is this json.data.approved, which is a button click, which I will show you in the next step how that works. So this you can set up to work extremely reliably because the button value is going to be approved or not. So even if you have two buttons, I'll show you how that works. Basically, we check in this stage if the human that we have sent the email to has positively or negatively responded to our inquiry or to whatever decision they need to make, right? So once that decision is made, and this is where we allow text fields, we can have single button fields, and if you need it, you may use, say, even an AI node after this to process that response to see if it was a positive response or a negative response, if you wanted it to behave more deterministically. So the key takeaway which I wanted to show you about the human in the loop is that you can fire this Gmail message from n8n and just wait for the response. And once you do receive the response, then you can take your action. Now, in this case, I just have a simple branch wherein if it was true, like if the manager approved it, we simply update the row. This is a straightforward super base node to update a row. So you can see we have the operation as update, the table name is posts. The condition we match on is the ID and what we received from the webhook. So in our webhook body, we had the post ID coming through because we set it up in our database function that the entire row data should be sent, right? So think of it as this entire row was being sent. In addition to this entire row being sent with the caption, image URL, video URL, likes, and all the other columns, we also did a join on the user ID with our profiles table. so that all of the profile data is sent, like the first name, last name, email, and so on about the user, right? So if we come back in here, you can see that our condition on matching before doing our update is basically the ID should be equal to whatever was sent in the webhook ID. And then we change the status from draft, which was the default state, to ready to publish. And we update the status updated at time to now. So if we come back into our tables and I just go to posts, you can see for this row that our status shows ready to publish, which makes sense because this was approved. So that is what we do in our next node. We update the status of the row in the database, and then I send a simple message out via email saying post approved to whoever was the user that created this post. They get an email notification. That's why they are the two recipient in this node. We send them a single email with something that just says, just wanted to let you know your post was approved. You can obviously change the message or change, like, instead of using a Gmail node, if you want to use a Slack node or however you want to notify them, you can do it. But the key focus of what I wanted to show you with these human in the loop system is how do we set up our trigger, which was done in Superbase. Then how do we set up our database function to call our webhook, and then how do we get our webhook to handle everything, including the capacity for a human to make a decision and make the most out of any automation system. So just to show you the email that was received, so this is the post approved message that I received about 5 minutes ago, just saying, just wanted to let you know your post was approved. Keep up the awesome work, which was basically just what we had set up in n8n, right? You can see it's in here in our message. So this was one flow where if we wanted a decision maker to actually write some text as feedback in our decision making stage. But if we wanted just a simple form that had a button, either just an approve button or an approve and reject button, then how we would do that is we would just change the configuration so slightly. So I've got this node set up and you can do this too. So in our send message node, which is the same send message and wait for response node, the only thing you would need to change is this response type. In the previous case, we had a custom form. You can experiment with these. You can do custom form, free text, or approval. And under approval, you can have approval only, or you can have approve and disapprove. So this just changes the form that you receive. So if I just save this automation, and right now, once it sends the message and starts waiting for the response, if I come into my Gmail account where I've received the message, you can see that we now have these two buttons, right? So if I click on approve, it's going to go down the same route we went through. So our if node is going to check if JSON.approved was true, and it's going to go down this route. But if we click reject, it's going to go down the other route. So now you can see the action was recorded. If we come back into our n8n node, you can see that it's gone down this route, but we have an error in here because this error was basically from when we were expecting a text response with feedback. So this message just needs to be changed a bit. So we may just say, sorry, but your post was rejected, because we don't really have the feedback text node in here anymore. But basically, the logic or the takeaway, and if we wanted to just see this in action again, is if we send out our message. So now if I come into my Gmail, we have the new post approval required. You can see it's received the response. If we come into n8n, you can see we've changed the logic just slightly. So when you just have the buttons, you may do json.data.approved. So if it is true, it will go down our true branch. But now because we've declined, the json.data.approved is false. and it's going to go down our false branch. Inside our false branch, we just update the post table for this record ID, which is what we were getting from our webhook, which was inside our body for this ID. You can see it ends with ADD, which is the same ID, which is our post ID, and that was triggered by our database trigger and database function. We then set the status to rejected, and we update the timestamp of updated at. And so to verify this, if I just come in here and refresh the table, you can see that it has updated the status to rejected along with the timestamp. And just to show you the email that would be sent out, because that is the last part of our n8n node, we send a message to the user saying, hey, first name, sorry, but your post was rejected, and please keep up your efforts, and we know you're doing your best. So this first name field, in case I didn't point out earlier, we get the first name same way. We have all of the post information inside the post table and all of the user information inside our profiles table. We did a join on that, sent that data in a webhook. And now if I just check my email, you can see that we have this post rejected email, which says, hey, Eden, sorry, but your post was rejected. Please keep up your efforts, and we know you're doing your best. It was sent 2 minutes ago, and we have this email was sent with n8n. But if you wanted to disable that, you can just do that here by toggling off this append n8n. So that was it for this video. We covered how do we set up human in the loop systems, and basically how do you maximize the output of any AI automation or agent or application that you are building to build this component of decision making and adding humans to the loop.